in 2008. It didn't go so well, but they're investing again in 2023. So my goal today is to talk about what are the differences. Howdy, Frank.
I figured it out. Hi.
It's okay. I sent the email. I figured it would get there. It was getting really close to the time to go live. So
yeah,
we'll get set up here. So I was just going over a little bit of the story. I'll give some of the little bit of details that I know, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. And the idea is we're going to give people a chance in the comments to get some questions in to somebody who invested in 2008, didn't have a great experience, is investing again in 2023. You recently closed on a couple of deals. And add to that the fact that you do rehabs, like the business that you run does rehab. So you have that construction contractor knowledge added with investing. So let's start with 2008. What did that look like for you?
Well, I was trying to remember what spurred me to try to get rentals back then. It was awfully easy because they were just giving money out right and left. And like you guys always mentioned, they had the stated income loans, so you could pretty much tell them you made, $100,000, $200,000 a year, and you were qualifying for the money they were giving out. We did end up using some of the equity in our primary residence, and then we jumped into it. My thought was, you pick up a property, the tenant pays it off for you, and everything's good. That was the education that I had at the time. And probably maybe a year into it, the reality set in that wasn't how it works. And we ended up losing those properties. And so those were here in California, in Sacramento, one duplex and one single family. And then, so we ended up losing those. We ended up going through bankruptcy, which happened in 2010. And after that, I kind of just had to put my nose back to the grindstone and go back to working and everything like we always did. And we did that until pretty much 2019, when I was looking for some way to make some money for retirement. So I say I got started out of fear and desperation because I don't have, a regular retirement account. My wife has one. She's a teacher. It's not huge, but there's something there. And then, honestly, my first jolt back into real estate was actually watching Brandon Turner interview David Green. And, he was a police officer, and he had started picking up rentals and stuff, and had shared his story. And I had never lost the interest, but it got me reinvigorated, I guess, to pursue it again. When I had gone online looking for some way to make a retirement account, I was looking at regular, traditional stuff. And then I realized that wasn't going to work fast enough for me, because at that time I was 58 already. I'm going to be 60 this month. So we've been doing it for about 3 years now. And so that kind of led me through the whole YouTube thing. I ended up running across Michael Zuber, and then his philosophy continued that spark. And then through him, we ran into all you guys, the Three Amigos, the REI Avengers, and we haven't looked back.
So it sucks that you went through that in 2008. And what I really want to do is kind of clear up What's different? What happened then? Because you said, the first thing that you said, one of the first things was you took equity out of your house, right? So the house you were in, the value had gone up. And a lot of people in 2020 saw the same thing, right? So this is what could be similar. Values went up in 2020. So you had trapped equity, dead equity. We had people like Michael Zuber and the lumberjack landlord telling me to take out the equity in my house because there could be a deal coming that I could put it to work with in the future. So you did that around 2008. And you said there was a stated income loan. So were you doing rehabs? Were you self-employed at that point in time too?
Yeah, I started working for myself in 1990, so I'd been at it for quite a while at that point.
Okay. So you're working for yourself. You do stated income. Was it people stopped paying rents? Because if you bought them to hold them and properties values plunged in 2008, that doesn't make you sell. Did you have an adjustable rate mortgage, or were they fixed rate debt?
They were adjustable, and I think you had mentioned one of the loans in one of your other videos that it was like 104% of value, right? I think the single family was that type of loan. So we did not sell them; we lost them. So the rents didn't nearly cover the expenses. You know, we did have a property manager, even though it's only a couple hours from me. And in the beginning, I went up there and I did the rent readies myself.
Right. So you had the benefit of being able to do the work yourself. A lot of people fall into the trap of the more I do myself, the cheaper it will be. You probably did have the actual, if you do it yourself, the qualities where you're going to want it. Right. That's one thing a lot of us run into. I'm actually going through one of my first rehabs now, and I'm following handyman around going, okay, I don't like that. I'm going to pull that transition strip up again and reshape it to the trim or whatever, just small details that I guess don't matter to some people. But it's not always cheaper to do it yourself, because you said it was a couple of hours away and you was taking your time away from productive work you could be doing on a job site. So the 104%, so you're over levered when you buy it, right? So that's a thing that kind of bit a lot of people, bought me too. That was my first primary house before I was an investor and had rentals. I was over 100% levered. That didn't happen to very many people in 2020. They weren't doing no income verification. Like they went kind of forensic when you did refinances or new purchases. I'm always shocked at the new information lenders always want when they're looking at something like that. The adjustable rate is really, that's the thing that is missed every time the Crash Bros talk about. This is just like 2008. So in 2020, people pulled out equity like you did. So now we're a couple of years later. If you pulled out equity around 2008, around 2010, when you filed bankruptcy and you lost the 2 rentals, you were over 100% levered. That's not happening now. You didn't probably have to do too much to verify your income like you do now, because lending is tighter. But in 2007, 51% of mortgages had an adjustable rate. In 2020, it was 3%. Now it's it spiked up to 11. Now it's back down to about 8%. So we don't have half the mortgages with that adjustable rate. So I'm kind of going over this so people understand, yeah, in 2008, you got kicked in your teeth. I got kicked in the teeth. I tried to give away a house I couldn't. I was underwater on and owed more money on it than it was worth. And subject to wouldn't even work because people could buy homes for less than what my mortgage was at. So now we're in the 2020, you said 2019, you kind of had that wake up call. You didn't have a retirement account. I've emptied mine out in 2020. So as of then, I really didn't have one. I still contributed for the match. I hated doing it, but I liked the match, and math said to do that. So since 2019, what is the portfolio looking like now?
When we got restarted, the turnkey model was pretty attractive to me, just the basic concept of it. You get a pretty new house, you do pay, market for it. So there's not really any value add to begin with. So I ran across a turnkey promoter through BiggerPockets, and we tried. So the turnkey promoter introduced me to a turnkey provider, and the first one was in Pennsylvania. And I started going through the motions to purchase something there. And even though we had a down payment, our credit was great. So I thought, we're all ready to go. And then they mentioned this DTI thing that I didn't really understand. So our DTI was too high, and that person's lender couldn't qualify us. I think we were at 48 or almost 50%, even though the only debt we really have is our mortgage on our primary. Since we pulled all that equity out way back when, our mortgage, it got reassessed. They did a modification, but our payment didn't go down. So we don't have credit cards or car payments or any other debt, and it's still high. So that turnkey provider recommended a different lender, and they qualified us right away. It was same everything.
So in 2008, you had 2 rentals. You had a primary. You went through the mortgage process several times. You went through a bankruptcy. You lost the rentals. All that sucks. And when you go to buy the new rentals, the way you worded it, this is why I'm saying it this way. I'm not dragging you through it again. I want to clearly let people know that when you start investing, you may feel like other people know more than you, right? Because they have more experience, or because they have a bigger portfolio, or whatever it is. But you said this DTI thing popped up I didn't know about, and ours was a little too high for their lender, so we switched lenders, right? Meaning you had a house, you had some rentals, you went through the process of losing the rentals, and DTI never really came up. Because we had the loan options, that the toxic loans from 2005 to 2008, where you could just, I say how much I make, the lender says, okay, no problem, because they were giving money away. Well, we don't have that now. When you went to do this again, yeah, you had to kind of lender shop to find one, and your DTI was, you said, 48 or so. That's not, there are people in 2005, 6, and 7 who had a DTI that was about 200%, right? They were spending more money than they made, qualifying for loans, because they were hearing things like, don't worry, in a couple of years, when interest rates go down and the value goes up, you'll be able to refinance and you'll be fine. That's not happening now. There are some people who are getting adjustable rate mortgages. I don't suggest doing that, but that doesn't mean that those people are in trouble. Some of them are like Matt, the lumberjack landlord. Big, huge portfolio, 38 or 40 properties, 137 units. And then over here, you got a couple with adjustable rate mortgages to get a better deal now. And if something changes where the rates went really high and the rents dipped or prices dipped, he could just write a check from the other part of the portfolio. But that person starting out in 2007 or 8 who has a house and 2 rentals, and then the adjustable rate hits, and you pulled equity out, and you're over levered. As much as people think it sucks, that's what bankruptcy's for, right? You get limited. I think when you file bankruptcy, you can't do it again for 7 years. So it's kind of from the jubilee of every 7 years you can be released from indentured debt. Not that it's the option everyone should choose, but it's an option that was there, and a lot of people did it. Like, I was borderline this close to doing it myself, and all I had was 1 property. I hadn't even figured out how to buy rentals yet. So now, when you look at a property, you're having to verify your DTI, right? You had to find a lender that would accept your risk from your debt to income ratio. How levered are you? Like, when you buy a property, if it's worth $100,000, are you borrowing 104? So you wrap up the closing costs. You don't have to put any down payment into it. Is it like it was in 2007, or what do those numbers look like now?
Yeah, no, today, well, so we ended up buying a turnkey triplex was our first property when we got started. So that was 25% down. And that process of qualifying for a conventional loan was very detailed. It was almost excruciating the first time we did it, because they say, okay, we'll send you a pre-approval letter, and you think you're all set, but that is nowhere close to being where you need to be, so you go through all this, this whole process of getting all your documents, your bank statements, your income verifications, and all this stuff together for your file. And then they say, okay, now you're ready. We're going to send it to the, I forget the term, the actual, the person that's going to actually run all the numbers and see if you qualify. So it's like a pre-qual. Then they send it to the real person, and that real person has more questions and more stuff they need. Down to the day before your closing, they were asking us, for why did you deposit $1,500 in your bank account today, or where did that come from? And so you're not really set until you're signing, I guess.
Right. So throughout part of the loan process, when you're acquiring a property, you will kind of feel like it's the bane of our existence as an investor, but they're called underwriters. The person on the other end of the mortgage company, not the broker that you're working with who's trying to close the deal, not your agent who's trying to close the deal, but the person working for the bank, not you. They're not trying to make sure that you aren't going to fail. What the bank is trying to make sure is that this will be debt that they can sell. They vetted it enough to put it together and be able to sell it to the secondary market. And it won't be that toxic debt being bundled together with other debt that caused the cascade that happened in 2008. And it seems like every single time you go through a mortgage, they ask for something new, right? You said they asked, why did you make this deposit? It's something different every single time that you don't think can really matter. But one of the things they're doing is they're making sure that you're not double dipping. They want to know where the down payment funds came from. You put 25% down on that first turnkey place, which means if it was appraised at or above where you're at, you were at least 25% equity in that property, which is kind of the cost of selling. If you're going to go, an 8% of whatever the purchase price is going to go to listing agent fees. So if there hasn't been any growth in property, so you're not having to write a check to lose the asset starts because you have a levered position. That was the risk when you were 104% levered on that first one, wrapping the closing costs into it. If you went to sell, which you couldn't, which is why you went through the bankruptcy and just lost them, it would have cost you money to pay the cost of selling to lose an asset, because didn't know what DTI was, did self-verification on income, borrowed more than the property was worth, had an adjustable rate mortgage, like all of the things that most, I won't say all, but most of us in 2007 and 8 were doing, right? The banks were just like, here, take money. Why not? And we fell for that. You'll be able to refinance in a couple of years when interest rates come down, which they didn't, and prices go up, which they didn't. Because we know prices don't always go up. One of the things I teach in the 6 steps to getting started in real estate and reaching financial freedom and making work optional in 10 years or less is there's a thing called good debt. Well, how do you define that? It's debt that makes more than it's worth, right? More than it costs you, and debt that someone else pays off. So that seems like a really basic concept. But now if you start adding, what's your leveraged position? Is it an adjustable rate or fixed rate debt? Because an adjustable rate to me is not really good debt. It's a risk. So I would make it a small part of a portfolio, but not the whole strategy. So when did you get that first turnkey property? You said around 2019, you had the wake up call that, hey, I don't have a retirement plan. My spouse does, but you found BiggerPockets, you found a turnkey person who turned you on to a turnkey provider. And most of my properties, except for the most recent purchase, are turnkey, but not through a provider, right? From the MLS, usually needed less than a couple $1,000s in work. And maybe that wasn't needed. It was just nice to have. So I'm a fan of turnkey. But I haven't used a provider yet, because in my mind that says upcharge. But you live in California, right? I'm very sorry. And you invest where? Where do you invest?
So far, so the triplex was in Missouri. We have a duplex after that in Milwaukee. And then these 3 that you mentioned earlier that we picked up this year are single families. One is it is a turnkey in Gary, Indiana. And then we have one small single family in Illinois. Cahokia, Illinois, and then we just closed on that small 2-1 in St. Louis, Missouri. So the Illinois property is also through a turnkey provider. So we have 3 real turnkeys, and the other 2, well, the one that we just closed on in St. Louis was on the MLS. And we worked with an agent in St. Louis that is also on BiggerPockets. So that kind of helped us feel a little bit better about, working with someone in that market, and she's turned out to be really excellent. So the first turnkey we got, the original question, that closed. So we had a few turnkeys under contract. They didn't work out in 2019. And we ended up getting this one closed in the middle of 2020.
Are you tracking that Illinois has just had statewide rent control proposed by their legislature?
Yeah, I was listening to something about that, and whoever was talking about it was saying that it might affect all of the United States. Is there another?
Right. So Washington State proposed it earlier this year, like in February when we were in session, and it didn't make it out of committee. Illinois, it's on the agenda for the current session in Illinois. Who knows how far it'll make it? But part of, I believe, and this is what I've heard on online too. So everything on the internet is true. That's what Abraham Lincoln said. That Biden's plan for tenant protections is going to include some form of nationwide rent control, but I haven't seen like a bill or a proposed actual legislature like in Washington or Illinois to do that. I do know that rent control makes owners richer and tenants homeless, but you have to be aware that it's coming and plan for it. One of the ways it makes us richer is knowing that it's coming. Most people jack the rent up, and area average rent set rent. So if everyone is raising the rents, you have the ability to, because tenants can't move. Your expenses, it's what the problem with rent control is right now. If there's no rent control in the town where you're, and I don't think I would have spelled it right, but Cahokia, is that what
Yes.
you said? Okay. If there's rent control there now, you'll probably be raising it the maximum allowable every year, just in case there's a big, huge expense in the future or in the next few years that the increased rent is the only way you can manage it. But if there's no rent control, you don't have to raise the rent every year. And then we have a black swan event like the pandemic in 2020, where in 2021 almost all rents went up a lot because people could make up for the problem that happened. In a rent control place, you have to do it every single year. So a lot of people will say, well, the landlord can only raise it a certain amount, right? And you can kick a tenant out for a rehab, you can kick a tenant out to move in, you can kick a tenant out for a sale. So it makes people homeless in an area where rents are going up. So I'm not sure how it's going to go in Illinois. I don't, because I haven't really followed the politics there. I'm surprised it didn't make it out of session in Washington. Washington actually has a revised code of Washington saying rent control is illegal. But our, I want to say legislators, leadership, people that keep getting voted into office are more and more left-leaning. And so I think it's coming in the future, which sucks for the tenants. I will tell them all, you should be buying a house, you should own a house, because rent control is going to make your rent go up every single year. I just renewed 2 or 3 leases. I got one more coming up where the rent's staying the same this year. I can't do that if rent control goes through. It'll have to go up every year. So now you have this portfolio. You've been investing since 2019. You have the experience from 2008. You live in California. You're investing at a distance. So I've had a lot of people, I actually made a video not too long ago where somebody was, people have asked, I want to be a landlord, but I'm not handy. So what do I do? So I'm going to ask you kind of a sarcastic question. Have you flown to Illinois, Missouri, Milwaukee, and done any of this work yourself?
No, we haven't seen any of the properties in person. And that's kind of a running joke in our household because I don't fly. So one of these days we're going to have to do a road trip and go visit all the places in a camper or something. So no, I haven't seen them in person.
So I have a brother who doesn't fly too. So to take a vacation together a little over a year ago, we took a month and drove all over the country. He actually lives in Southern California too. Are you going to make it to Vegas when we have the one rental at a time event? It's like
we will be driving to Vegas. Yes.
Yeah, it's like a 5-hour, 6-hour drive. Yeah. Good. Awesome. I look forward to meeting you there. So that's an awesome story. As much as you're willing, like, don't get too fine in the details here. What does the cash flow look like now? Like, how much is going out every month? How much is coming in? Do you have tenant turnovers going on? Have you gone through any evictions since 2020? Just kind of give us your experience this time compared to last time, because now you have either fixed rate debt or you're buying them in cash. Very different situation.
Yeah, I would have to say honestly, the 3 that we picked up this year are kind of stabilizing, and the 2 multis that we have are holding their own. So the bank accounts are a little bit better each month than the money we have to put out. Luckily, on the duplex, when we bought it, there were some issues, and I got the seller gave us a $20,000 credit, and after we took it over, a lot of big stuff broke: air conditioners, heating units. He had put a new roof on it in 2019, but if we hadn't gotten that credit, because that helped with a couple of small things in the triplex as well. So we used that, pretty much all of that money, fixing up the duplex. And so now it should be good for quite a while. As far as the evictions, we were close in that unit, but the tenant, they went to the eviction proceedings in the court. They were that close, and they agreed to catch up. So they were about 3 months behind, and they got caught up. They're still with us. We decided to do a month-to-month lease with them, and other than that, we are going to have a couple of turnovers in the triplex. One of them, she was our very first tenant, and she just can't handle the stairs anymore because she was upstairs. So that's the reason she's leaving on good terms. There's a couple in I would say the largest unit on the bottom, and they renewed their lease in April. But yesterday we got a letter from an attorney stating that they were wanting out of their lease because of a lot of bad reasons: roaches, bed bugs, there was a possum in the unit, all these things, mold. So that was shocking to get. But when we spoke with the property manager last night, and he let us know he contacted the attorney because the unit just went through the county inspections. So the inspector was there with that tenant while she was complaining about mildew or mold, and she couldn't show the inspector any evidence of it. So the property manager suspected that they were applying for a loan to purchase a home, and they just wanted to get out of their lease, and they couldn't do it easily. So they decided to make up all these false reasons. So we're going through that right now. And I think, thinking about it, years ago, we probably would have freaked out about that. But now it's just something we have to deal with, and we'll find a way to deal with it. So I think our mindset's changed a lot. I think about, people always say, if you're going to do this, just think about the worst that can happen. And if you can get through that scenario, it should be okay. And then I realized that the worst did happen to us already back in 2008. And so, the chances of it being even worse than that are pretty minimal, is how I look at it.
Nice. Couple questions. I'm going to back up a little bit. You said when you purchased one property, the seller gave you a $20,000, what'd you call it?
A credit.
A credit, right?
Huh.
They just gave it to you. They just said, "Hey, we really like Frank," and I'm not going to say her spouse's name. It should be on the video if she was comfortable with that. But um, how did you get the $20,000 credit? Let's walk people through that.
So that one, it was purchased through, I would call it basically another turnkey provider. It was not considered a turnkey property, but it was in decent shape. Like I said, he had done the roof. So we went through the inspections, and they, there were some things in the basement, like one of the walls was moving a little bit, and a bunch of other issues. So after the inspection, we tallied all that up, and what I came up with was about $25,000 to $30,000 worth of work. So we just said, thank you, we're not going to pursue it. And so we went our separate ways. And then the person that was helping with the sale on our side said they reached back out to her and said, what would it take to make the deal happen? And I think at the time I had told them they would need to give us $25,000 for the repairs. And they countered, and they said if we would go for 10, and I did not agree. I said 20, and they agreed to it. So after that happened, we went through with the sale, and we got that credit at closing, and we got that money right away. So we didn't use it all right away. Obviously, it took a while for those repairs to come up and for us to need to spend it, but I was glad we got it.
Yeah, so that's actually fairly common. You make an offer that you're willing to pay if everything is kind of what it looks like. Like you know there's going to be some things to fix. You get the inspection report, and pretty much every time, because the inspector who does your inspection report is protecting themselves. Whenever they find something that needs fixed, they're going to write it in such verbiage that it looks like the place is just falling down, that it's very dangerous and nobody should live there, because they don't want you to be able to come back and say, well, there was this thing wrong, you could have told me. They're going to tell you in very scary words, even though it might not be that scary and it just needs some work. But that gives you verbiage that you can use with the seller. And that works even if the seller says the property is being sold as is. As is doesn't mean they won't do a price adjustment and they won't fix things. It means they're more likely to do a price adjustment than to fix things. That's really how that translates. So you negotiated that, you got that. The tenant that was 3 months behind or a few months behind in rent that went to the eviction process, so you had served eviction papers and got to court. Did you ever hear how they got caught up? Did they just find the money, or did they get rental assistance from any agencies?
Yeah, I think they just got caught up. I think they were having issues. Either the husband or the wife hadn't worked for a little while. I don't know, because honestly, at the point when they caught up, they had to give us a check for $4,500. So they were 3 months behind. The rent is at the time their rent was $1,250. So they just came up with this lump sum, and they were I think they had a little bit of trouble because it wasn't all in one chunk. It was, say, within a week, $3,000 here, $500 there, $900 here, but they came up with it, and they wanted to stay. And I think, I've had questions for you recently about property management and stuff. That property manager is one that I'm looking to replace, because they let that ball start rolling and let it go too far. I agreed with the way that it ended up working out. The property manager said, if we kick them out now, you're not going to get any money. If we let them try to catch up, at least you'll get the $4,500, which made sense to me at the time. But now in the downstairs unit, there's three young women sharing the rent there. And last month, one of them didn't pay. So it's $450 behind. They paid for this month, but they still haven't come up with that $450 that they were out last month. And I don't agree with the way the property manager's handling that.
So one of the things that I do while I self-manage properties this actually is one of the reasons why in a decade I haven't had a late or missing rent payment. And it sounds mean when I say what I do, and you've probably heard me say this in videos, but I would have a conversation with your property manager and make sure they understand that you want it done the same way. When the rent is due, they get a grace period. Your tenant has a grace period. They're usually checking with whatever it is, their cell phone, their car payment, where they get their food from, where they pay their rent, to see which one of those can adjust the most to allocate their money differently. It's not that they don't have enough money, it's that they would like to do something, but if they could take money away from one bill, it's easier now. Well, so first, you want them to understand that the day after the grace period, you're going to get eviction papers, like that day. That starts the process. So if a tenant has gone 3 months or 2 months, and then your property manager started that because they were giving them like this one with you, if you have 3 tenants in there, they are all responsible for the full lease, unless each one signed that they're renting each room by that amount. So if they've all signed for the full amount, all 3 of them get eviction papers the day after the grace period ends. And I've had people say, well, that's just mean and heartless. I mean, yeah, sometimes there can be a justifiable story, but did they reach out with one? Did they even ask for it? No, they just didn't pay it. So when they all get served the eviction papers, here's why: it's a favor to the tenant. One, they actually get eviction papers and let them know that you're going to follow the system that's there to protect them, because it's also there to protect you. But 2, now they have those eviction papers that they can take to any agency that offers rental assistance, or show it to friends and family. Go to their parents and say, look, and we're actually getting evicted. It's not just me saying I don't have enough money again. And get rental assistance from an agency, from a local church, from whatever that county resources are. But a lot of those rental assistant sources won't even talk to the person until they have the eviction papers in hand. Or to show to an employer and say, I need to draw against my 401k. Here's the justifiable reason I'm late on my rent. And it has to be a qualifying event for some employers, like they hold the purse strings on someone's retirement accounts. Reason number 74, why I don't like those. So I would have a conversation with your property manager saying, this is not acceptable, right? The day after the grace period, you need to start the proceedings, period. That will stop this from happening again, especially if you're looking at a triplex. Tenants talk. And when they hear from each other saying, wow, we were 1 day late past the grace period, we were served with eviction papers, which is the landlord's right? Meaning you're going to follow the procedures. And especially if now this one sounds like they've set the precedence. This tenant can be 3 months late. This tenant can, these roommates, only 2 of them had to pay. And then we're in the next month, they all paid, which means if they've all paid and they haven't been filed eviction papers, there's nothing stopping those 3 from doing something like it next month when a different roommate has a different problem. So I would talk to the property manager and be shopping for a property manager. I know you watch the content. I've seen you in a lot of things. So you watch Millennial Mike's videos, and he invests at a distance and uses property managers. And even Zuber went through 5 property managers in the first couple of years to find the ones that worked out for him.
Yeah, it's been in that triplex that I mentioned, the first property management company I did fire because they were just not handling any business. So they went, and just by chance we found a really great one, and he's the one who went and talked to the attorney yesterday for us. But so we've hooked up with him, and his mentor who got him started in property management is the one that is helping us in St. Louis on the new one that we just closed on. So their procedures are the same. Their inspections were awesome. Lots of pictures, lots of recommendations and things like that for how we can make the property as nice as possible for the tenant. So we're happy with them. I'm dealing with the one in Gary because we closed on that property about, it must be going on 4 weeks now, and they still haven't found a tenant. So we're trying to work that out. But yeah, property management has been the biggest issue. Like you said, I think so. We're on year 2 and 3 with the first 2 properties, and the cash flow is starting to improve. I think the biggest difference between 2008 and now is that at least the properties are supporting themselves, and some where, before we were probably only bringing in 75% of the total cost of running the place. back then.
Yeah, those first few years are rough, and you scaled a lot faster in these last couple of years than I did. When I first started, it was 2 full years before I purchased one duplex, and then 2 more years before I got the next duplex. So literally 4 years before I had, some rentals, basically. So 4 years where there really wasn't income. There wasn't, the income snowball wasn't happening, cash flow wasn't happening. Most people aren't willing to go through those 4 years. But now every year going forward, once they're stabilized, once you have tenants in place, now you deal with a tenant turnover instead of 3 or 4 months of vacancy. The vacancy thing with property management is very confusing to me. My brother has 10 rentals. He has property management with, I think, somewhere between 4 and 6. So it's around half, somewhere in there, right? And he has had vacancies. Sometimes it took 2 months on the property management ones. On the ones where he's managing, I don't know that he's ever had more than a week between tenants. And I had a friend, I want to say a month ago now, because they've gotten a full month since they signed the tenant. I helped her list it. We took Matt, the lumberjack landlord's information on how to make a listing more attractive from his course. Put it on, Hemlane, which hits all the platforms. Versus I'm driving by to get there. There's another unit about 5 or 6 units away. It's a kind of a small multifamily area that has a for rent in the window. It's on Zillow. The rents were almost exactly the same. That place has been available for about 4 months. And I don't get the difference because my friend, when we posted, it was a mountain. I was helping her fight through this mountain of applications to figure out, of the qualified ones, who's the most qualified, or of the qualified ones, first one that came in, to then go. And this is how I was going through the steps of, you don't go and meet a bunch of people because it'll take all of your time. But if somebody pays for an application, you can schedule a viewing. If people want to see the property, but they haven't paid for an application, then you do an open house format where you pick an evening for 2 hours or a weekend time for 2 hours, where you go, and anybody who wants to see it, that's reached out, of the 20 or 30 people that reach out, they know that there's a time where they can come with other people to see it and look at it. And it was rented in less than a week, like from availability to get the things done, to get the tenant in place, versus where I see people with property managers, they just don't have the rush to get it in there. Another one of the things property managers and owners are at odds at. I'm going to go through and see if there's any questions coming in. As I'm looking through this, quite frank, I'm going to ask you a question. Going forward, what's the goal? What do you see the portfolio size being? Is there a cash flow goal? And what do the next few years look like for you?
Well, I think that's changed a little bit in the recent weeks. So originally, you spoke with us about, we had a lump sum of cash and we were debating whether to pay off our primary or use the money to pick up some rentals. And at that time, we decided to use it to pick up more rentals. Now, I think whether the next one, I'm hoping the next one will be a multi, like a duplex or triplex or quad. If it's a quad, say we end up at 12 doors, at that point, I think one of my thoughts is that we would start accumulating that cash flow to pay off our primary now, because that would save us a couple $1,000s a month. And if we have 10 to 12 units, it'd be a lot easier to have Cynthia make work optional, for example. But if we had paid off the house first, then it would have been a lot harder to accumulate any rentals for some extra income in the future. So I'm happy we decided to do it that way. But right now, those are just some thoughts I've been having recently about, getting a couple more units and then working to pay off this house.
I love the way you put it. Dave Ramsey has some great advice. For certain people, he's outstanding. He's helped some people fix their finances. Not so much when it comes to investors that want to grow a real estate portfolio. Cody from Cody and Christian Multifamily Strategies, I've heard him talk about this, and I'm sure he heard it somewhere, but I'm crediting him because that's where I heard it. Has this thing that he likes to refer to as the debt hammer, right? You don't pay off your primary house for 10 to 15 years so that you free up that money to save or invest. It's you acquire some assets like your rental portfolio. Once the cash flow is coming in and you're stabilizing, you take that cash flow and then you use that cash flow as the debt hammer on. I would look at that. For me, I'm not going to tell you what to do if you want to pay off your primary. That for some people gives them that swan account, sleep well at night. They go, oh, my house is paid off. It's much more comfortable to do this. What's the interest rate on your primary house? How much would it take to pay it off to get that $2,000 a month versus what's the interest rate on some of your rentals? What would happen to the cash flow if you paid those off first? Because generally where we live, we get the best interest rate, right? Because it's owner occupied. And then possibly, I'm not saying you did, I'm going to ask, but a lot of us refinanced in 2020. Right? I did half my portfolio, went from 6+% interest rates to 3% interest rates and increased my cash flow. So if you have fixed rate debt on your primary, I would look at what's the interest rate and how much would it take to get that paid off versus can you have a bigger impact to your cash flow if you get rid of some of the debt on your properties if they have higher interest rate compared to what if you purchased another rental that produced more income? Because I looked at it too. I should pay off a rental. I should pay off a mortgage, but I'm able to find properties that get a better return. And sometimes maybe not year one. Right, especially if you're investing at a distance and you got to stabilize and you're going to probably go through a couple of property managers. You might not have to do that again now that you have a unit there with a good property manager. You might add a unit with the same one, so you don't have to go through that. It's one of the things my daughter said. I think she was like 15 when she said it. I was talking about paying off my single family house, which had my highest interest rate, lowest owed amount on a mortgage, versus buying a rental, or I forget, there was 3 options, probably just spending the money. And she said, it's really hard to make a decision when all outcomes are positive. So if you pay off your primary, that's positive. If you buy assets that produce more cash flow, that's positive. If you pay off rentals that have a higher interest rate or a smaller amount, so it hits the debt avalanche and the debt snowball concepts at the same time, all 3 of those, it's hard to choose. It's a good position to be in, that you get to choose, right? That's a good start.
Yeah, I think like you always say, that when all the options are good, it's a nice problem to have. We and I've mentioned to you before, so on our primary, the interest rate is actually 2%. And we owe, I looked at it, we owe about $290. So I struggle with that because I could see us picking up when we originally started it. 20 was the number, right? 20 doors at approximately $200 a door after Pai Tai. And like you said, after the first couple of years, that's going to grow exponentially, the yield, and then. And one of the other, so Cynthia's and I honestly have been worried, like if I can't work or I kick the bucket or something, I don't want to leave her with this big mess. But since these last few months, I realized she has like a life insurance policy on me. So it will almost pay off the house if I did pass away or something. So that is a little bit of relief, but the longer we can keep moving forward like this, they'll be even better off if something were to happen. So, and I get the bug, and I just keep looking at properties and looking. I'm looking at one right now again in St. Louis. But right now she's, let's stabilize for a while and make sure everything's going to work out, which makes a lot of sense. But when you're used to looking at all these deals and then one pops in there that's really good looking, it's hard not to go after it. So
It really, so
that's
I, that's why I want to do the members only live where we look at deals, but I'm afraid I'm going to find a deal that's so good I have to pounce on it. Because I want to stabilize myself too. I'm just closing on, I just closed on my first this rehab burr live in. And I just want to, just like you, kind of let it, just like your spouse, let it stabilize. But the deals are out there and they pop up, and you have the skill set now to recognize that's a great deal. We should probably jump on it. A couple of quick things. I'm not a fan of life insurance because I'm single and my kids are over 18, right? So I don't have somebody dependent on my income. You have a spouse. I would recommend a larger insurance policy. The premium's probably not going to be that much to increase that, especially if you already have one in place. Because that way, pre-existing and age doesn't matter as much for an increase as adding a new one. I recommend that. I also caution about never being worth more dead than you are alive, because my kids would have killed me for a slice of pizza. So just make sure you understand if Cynthia isn't going to do that. But
I thought about it.
there you go. See, it's in the mind. I agree with Julie. She piped in and said, "Do not pay off the 2% debt." I feel like that's an asset. Like you can't get money at 2% right now. Most of us can't, right? Without seller financing and finding the right deal. But maybe some of the rentals. At your stage with your growth right now and you're stabilizing, I would probably be packing up money for the next purchase. But there's a question here that came in kind of at the beginning from Simply Z. And so I want to cover this and then see if your opinion is anywhere close to mine. A friend and I got approved for a loan on a property, splitting everything 50-50, primary residence for a few years, then rental. Would you recommend we form an LLC, or would a signed agreement be fine? So I think people that watch my channel know what my response is going to be, but I'm going to ask you first. They are partnering with a friend to purchase a place 50-50. They've both been approved for the loan. Would you recommend having an LLC or just having a signed agreement?
I think, well, just from what we've been learning with you, I think I would lean towards the signed agreement if it's all drawn up with an attorney. I think, the LLC thing, as you mentioned, is not really, it protects them from mistakes that their partner might make, right? But not necessarily anything else.
So that's kind of why I wanted to ask is whenever the LLC thing comes up, I pounce on it and I'm like, there's already so much to learn with real estate. Why add the extra element of an LLC? And it doesn't give you tax benefits and it doesn't protect you from your own mistakes. And I get visceral because there's so many new investors they get stopped in their tracks thinking they need something they don't actually need. But there are some times, and that's why I wanted to clarify, there are some times it makes sense. And I think you kind of came around to it at the end there. If you have partners, the purpose of an LLC is to protect you from someone else's mistakes. So if I was going to partner with somebody, me and Millennial Mike we're going to make an offer on a 5-plex in Indiana, and we would form an LLC. And we're friends, and we have investment properties. It's to protect you from someone else's mistakes. So if Simply Z is still here, I recommend the LLC if you're going to have a partner, and have that signed agreement now too with the LLC, because right now everybody's getting along. It's going to be really hard to get anything in writing or change anything in the future when people aren't getting along. That's the problem that makes you need the writing, is not when you need to write it down. So I'm glad I had that question come up, because it sounds anti-LLC, but it's anti-LLC for tax benefits or for protections when it's just you or your spouse. Doesn't make any sense then. But when you have a partner, this is one. The other time is if you're going to use hard money. Right? A lot of hard money lenders require LLCs to do the loan. So there are times it makes sense to have an LLC.
Yeah, or if you're going to do a commercial loan. But just a quick note back to the 2% on our place. I guess one of the reasons that I really think about it is because when they did the loan modification in 2014, and I guess they recast the term. So our payment didn't go down. Our payment is just under $3,000 a month. the principal and interest part of that is about $2,000. So if we paid off the house, we would be saving the $2,000, and the rest would be for taxes and insurance, the $600 or $800 in there.
$290,000 to increase your, since you're decreasing the expense by $2,000, you're basically increasing your cash flow by $2,000. It's kind of a wonky way to look at it that I wouldn't usually recommend. With $290,000 purchasing, you purchased a property, I think, for 60 something thousand recently, one of your Indiana ones.
Yeah, we did the cash purchases. We did, one was 70 in St. Louis and one was 60 in Illinois.
Okay, so 290,000 is what you owe. Divided by 70, we'll go with the more expensive one. That's 4. You basically be able to get 4 properties paid off, each one cash flowing. How much would a paid off property purchased for $70,000 generate every month?
What we figured on the $70,000 one, after taxes, insurance, and property management, and CapEx and maintenance and vacancy, it would cash flow $500 to $600 a month.
So $500 a month, we'll go with the low estimate. Okay. At 4 of those, that's $2,000 a month. So it's the same as paying your property off, except you've now started 4 depreciation schedules on your income. Right, you're going to gain appreciation on 4 properties. And that's with current year. 3 years from now, if rents go up even just $50 a month each, that adds another $200. So that's why I'm not saying one's better than the other. And sometimes that mental piece of my primary house is paid off is valuable. You know your situation, you know what to choose. I'm just saying, hey, here's some ways to look at it. It's almost the same if you buy 4 that were the more expensive one. You have 4 that are paid off, that then generate the $2,000 a month to pay the mortgage, right? So you get that same savings there, and you're able to depreciate those buildings to offset more income from rentals. Again, really hard to choose when both outcomes are positive.
Yeah, I like looking at it that way, and once I realized that we do have the life insurance policy in place, it made me lean more towards, like you were just saying, of picking up more properties, and all the other benefits that come with it, after a couple of years of owning those.
Actually, it's going to sound weird. I look forward to the next couple of years staying in contact with you and seeing how you go and which way you choose. That's the best part of this for me. Kind of why I'm doing this. I see Millennial Mike jumped in here and said, Frank is the man, good dude through and through, big supporter of us, and that's why we have to support him. Hope to see him in Vegas. So that'll be cool.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Hotel California.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, without you guys, you and Matt and Mike, we wouldn't be where we're at today. So thanks for that.
I appreciate that. That's the hope. The whole point of doing this is to find people and say, hey, there's another way. And when you did this in 2007, 2008, the thing that was missing, right? I mean, the toxic debt was a big problem, but the thing that was really missing for me at that same point in time was YouTube University. Like the information out here from other people who've done it. And I want to read this from Hotel California for you. They say, the guest is an inspiration to everyone, especially for those who got screwed over by the housing market and crooked banks. So I think you are an inspiration. I think it's really cool. There is a question here from Jason. Frank, how did you find good markets at a distance? I know Gary, Indiana, you probably, hopefully, REI Avengers, saw Millennial Mike, saw he was crushing it there and reached out to one, but how did you find the other ones?
Yeah, so the first one the triplex was our first one in Missouri, and that the person that we purchased that through lives maybe 40 minutes from me. I ran into him on BiggerPockets as well. His name is his first name is Mike. He's with Pinnacle Investments, and he was connected with the turnkey provider in Missouri. So I don't know if I should give that much trust just because they're on BiggerPockets and they live close to me, but that's when I took the leap. And so that was the first one. And then just going through all the information we were getting through through YouTube, and not necessarily with you guys at this point, but the other person, his name is Nate Armstrong, and he's a big time investor, and he and his group were mainly in Wisconsin buying and selling, I guess what they would have called turnkey, right? They were people would come to them if they were wanting to sell a property and didn't want to go through agents and all that stuff. So we found the duplex through them. And then for St. Louis, well, let me jump back. So the Illinois property was through my original turnkey promoter. Her name's Allie Boone, and she did write for BiggerPockets for a while in the beginning. I think she was writing about turnkey. She has, I think, 10 units, and she started in 2009. And I think there was a bit of negative feedback as far as the turnkey subject. Anyway, she ended up leaving BiggerPockets, but honestly, she's like you guys. I can call her, I can email her, text her if I have a question. And I mentioned that we were under contract probably for 2 or 3 turnkeys, one in Independence, Missouri. I forget the other town, but when we got down to the inspections, things didn't look good. And I mentioned before that sometimes being a contractor myself, I shoot myself in the foot because I expect the quality of work to be good. And it wasn't. Just little cosmetic things that are easy to take care of. And why wouldn't, and if they don't take care of those, you wonder what else they neglected. So her name's Allie Boone. She introduced me to the turnkey provider in Illinois, and they're St. Louis Investments, and they have, I think they still have some properties available. So that's how I got hooked up in Illinois. And then in St. Louis, like I mentioned, I was looking, and I also mentioned to you, Dion, that we belong to the Addicted to ROI community, and they have the Agents Invest. It's kind of like a subgroup, but those are agents in the Midwest that look for deals for investors, and they post them in the group. And so that's how I found the one that we just paid cash on. It was my first time working with her, but again, I just was Googling her, and it turns out she's also a BiggerPockets member as an agent. So that gave me a little bit more confidence.
I like what Millennial Mike says often about virtual networking. How he interacted with Zuber for years before meeting him. He met me, I met him through local Facebook group and YouTube, right? And when you go in BiggerPockets and you see somebody there, or you go into any, Addicted to ROI, Choose FI, any of the groups where investors talk often and try to share information. Being a member of that group doesn't automatically give you, validity or my trust or anything. Trust but verify. Look for references. Who else have they worked with? What's their history? How long have they been in there? One of the things with BiggerPockets is you can look up the person, see how many comments or posts they've made. If you're in the Addicted to ROI, how many other people have worked with them, and then other ways to verify who it is too. There's a lot of fisher people out there that join those groups, make a couple of posts, and then they come in with a really good sounding, obviously, if it's so good to be true, you better jump on it before it goes away, kind of deals. There's one of the last questions here, and then I'll let you get to your evening. It's from Jason. Also, Frank, are you looking at doing Section 8? I think they say in Indiana, but with any of your properties, are you using any housing authority voucher programs with your portfolio?
Yeah, and that's been a learning process, as you know, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about it. So the St. Louis property that we closed on came with a Section 8 tenant, and she wanted to stay, so she's re-signing her lease by the end of this month. The Illinois property also came with a Section 8 tenant, and that one worked out. So that turnkey provider, part of their service was that they would put a tenant in place before you close on the property. And what ended up happening was the actual turnkey provider himself has properties there, and he had a Section 8 tenant that was looking for a nicer place. I guess the place he was renting to her still needed a bit of rehab. So she moved into our place, and then he's rehabbing his place to get another Section 8 tenant. So he works with them himself. And then, yeah, so those two are Section 8. The rest of them are regular tenants.
I'm going to look up something really quick here. The Section 8 tenants that was re-signing their lease, what state is that in?
She's the one in St. Louis.
St. Louis, and that's Missouri?
St. Louis, Missouri, and it's St. Louis County as well.
Okay, St. Louis County. I'm going to share my screen here in a second, if this ends up being a thing. I want to see if I can help you with this really quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
What you were saying earlier, there was a question earlier about finding the markets and stuff. And like on this St. Louis property that we're talking about, the agent that we purchased it with had a recommendation for a roofer. And so we got an estimate from him because we knew the place needed a roof. And actually we got a credit for that also of $4,000 in that deal to get the roof done. And he's doing the roof today. He sent me pictures once it was torn off. And I asked him to send me pictures as it goes back on. So having that trust with the agent, kind of gave me trust with her roofer, because he does other roofs for them in that real estate brokerage. So I think we can start building on that.
Awesome. So if I was doing that and it was something as big as a roof, I would probably go to Thumbtack, get a couple of estimates, just give the address and just say, don't disturb the tenants. You can count the squares, tell me what a roof replacement would cost, and just compare to what they're getting you. And I mean, I wouldn't change to a different contractor unless it was a significant difference, right? Because you have the relationship with your property manager as well. But if it was more than $500, $400, I'd probably go, okay, that's good, but I've got another quote. You can either match it with your guy, or I'm going to go with this other company. But what I've done here, and I don't know if you can see this on your phone, is I've pulled up the fair housing rents for the county that Section 8 tenant is in, that's about to renew their lease. And so if you're, and I want to walk you through the steps here as an investor who's worked with Section 8 now for, I'm going to get my first tenant like 2015, so almost a decade for Section 8, right? The fair housing market rents, it is adjusted every year, right? They come out with a new number of what they'll pay. It's based off of 7 years. So they look at the last 7 years, they take out the most recent 2. So those last 5 is what they're going to get an average from. So right now in 2023, the fair, and how many bedrooms is this unit that she's in?
Two bedroom.
So right now, basically HUD will pay about $1,000. It says $999. It might be a little less than that because they wrap up in your utilities into that. And they might go up to 10% more than that, because if there's a shortage of units in the area, they have a 10% variance they're allowed to do. So do you know what the current rent is?
Yeah, she pays $1,100.
$1,100. So she's about $100 above fair market. So that's at 10% variance. January 1st, 2024, fair housing market for this county goes to 1209. So it goes up $210 basically, which means you can sign a lease now for the next year that has a pre-planned scheduled in rent increase as of January 1st from 1100 to 1200, 1300, whatever, because it would still be that 10% variance from whatever this is. So you can sign the lease now at the 1100 that it's at and say it's a 12-month lease, but as of January 1st, this scheduled rent increase happens then. You don't have to wait for the entire lease to run out to adjust to the fair market rent for the housing authority for that county then. So if they haven't signed the lease yet, at the end of this month, when they're going to be re-signing, you could, maybe not the full $210 that it's going up, but go from 11 to 1250. Housing authority will see what the fair, you can even send them, you if you don't have the link, I'll text it to you, of what fair housing is as of January 1st. So the whole lease doesn't have to be one amount. Housing authority goes on an annual, but the lease is based on 12 months from when it's signed. So something to think about.
Okay, yeah, I gotcha. If you recall, so the property in Illinois with the other Section 8 tenant, I reached out to that property manager and I mentioned the HUD FMR, and she's the one who said she didn't go by that because they go by on a case-by-case basis.
It is a case-by-case basis, but when you send this and you look like an educated landlord, and maybe you don't even have to send this. Just when you re-sign the lease, you could say with the tenant, look, we're re-signing now, it's 1100, but as of January 1st, it's going to go to 1250 or 1200 or whatever increase you're comfortable with. It doesn't have to be the binder strategy. That's just one I use. This is a tenant that's already in place. And you can just say it's a scheduled increase for the year of 2024. And if they come back and they say, no, we won't do that, then you go, well, here, let me show you fair market rents in the area and the increase that's happening in 2024.
And would that conversation be with the tenant or the actual Section 8
You'll
case?
probably do it with the property manager to make sure that the lease is written to include this. And if you have a property manager that's doing Section 8 and they're saying, we don't even look at fair housing rents, I would find a new property manager because yes, it's case by case. They'll rate your rental. They might come up with a sliding scale of it, but you need to at least know where their threshold is so that you know if you're far below or if you are above, you know, you're 10% above what they were paying for this year now. So that seemed to be working great. But when an increase like this next year is one of the largest increases in Section 8 we've seen in 3 or 4 years, which is going to raise non-Section 8 rents as well. Because who's going to rent to a non-Section 8 for less than what you could get for Section 8?
Yeah.
Cool. Let me see if there's any last questions here. I think we're good. The last thing I'll let you wrap up with, if you could do it in just a couple minutes. If somebody was starting brand new in 2023, what would you suggest they do? This is somebody who has a job but doesn't have any assets yet.
I think probably the hardest thing right now is finding or picking your market, but no matter what, to be able to start running numbers and analyzing some deals, and at the same time making sure you're lendable, I guess, finding out what would be required of you to get a loan on a property. We when we were doing that, we spoke with the lender, let them know we were looking at properties in the for the multis, we were looking at 200,000 to 400,000. So they qualified us for 400,000. Again, you know, and the debt to income ratio, I would, you know, the lines of credit are an issue. Car loans are an issue. That all drags it way up. So yeah, so like Mike says, you know, getting your money right first, making sure that you could qualify.
Couple of quick questions here. Off the top of your head, do you know what the interest rate is on your car loans?
I don't have car loans.
Okay, good. There was a follow-up question here for D Storm 2.0 who asked about Section 8. Because I said, suggest the rent increase at the lease renewal, maybe schedule an increase for January. What happens if Section 8 says no? And I've actually had that happen. I had a tenant that was at 1,800. I wanted to raise to 2,200. They said 1,800 is the most we can do. They actually sent me an email saying that's the most we can do. Well, what you do then, D-Storm, is you do the work for the housing authority, because it's a person working for a state agency. They can't just go to their boss and say, we really like Frank and Cynthia, we're going to raise their rent for their tenant. But if you provide them with the fair market, the housing, the fair rental information from HUD and comps, find other 2-bedroom units in the area on Redfin, Zillow, Trulia, apartments.com, any of the rental places that show that 2-bedroom units are renting for the amount you want or more. And so in my case, I found some for 2,400, sent it. And Section 8, after sending an email saying 1,800 is the most we can pay, they went to 2,200. So it's a negotiation. And I typed in the chat here, the person with the ability to walk away has the power. Section 8, Matt, the lumberjack landlord, said this to one. He said, well, fine, if you won't raise the rent to the amount that I want, which is within the HUD agreement, and there's comps, then you have to tell the tenant they're being kicked out of my place and I'm not renewing the lease because you won't do the right amount. And then they agreed to the amount. It's when you want to go above fair market rent and you want to go above comps, or you want to count something like a swimming pool or storage or a garage, which Section 8 doesn't. They only go off bedroom count, that they have just as much power as you do. But if you do the work for them, you're more likely to get them to agree to it. Awesome. Frank, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story with people. As some people here have said, you are an inspiration to a lot of people. And this is what it is so many people say, well, the only way you can succeed in real estate is if you started 20 years ago and you've been investing for 20 years. You really this time started after 2019. And you've got a pretty impressive portfolio so far. And great motivation. I mean, you've mentioned a couple of times the goal would be to get Cynthia retired. That's a noble goal. What does retirement look like for you is a topic for another video. Maybe we'll do that someday.
Yeah, we'll do that. I appreciate you taking the time with me as well. And, we always, one of my goals has always been to try to help anyone who was thinking about starting this journey. I know, and like you mentioned, your reason or your why, if it's not strong enough, it's going to be hard to keep going through all these little things you have to learn along the way. But, and through you, I always offer to, if anybody has questions or anything, I mean, they can have my number, they can have my email, and I'm up, because in our area, I mentioned there's not really any meetup groups or anything like that. So, and I always joke, you guys are my real estate circle of friends. So
it's a joke. It's a joke, but it's true. You guys are mine too. So I will pin your email in a comment after the live stream. So if you come back to this video after the live stream is over, your email, and I'll make sure I use the right one, because I've got your builds one. If that's the one you want, if not, send me another one and I'll put it in there. So if people want to reach out with questions, they can find you there.
Yeah, the FJC build is the one I always use. So that's
Awesome.
that works.
Well, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us on a not Tuesday live stream. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.
Thank you.
And we should be off of YouTube.